What was the haschol and the siyum of the Maamar? What did we learn? We learned an incredibly high pshat in the Pasuk Vayehi Miketz Nasayim Yomim Ufare Chelim B'nei Emid Alayir. How high was it? The idea is as follows. There's Chitzonius HaTorah and then there's Pnimius HaTorah. There's the external level of the Torah, which is the Oisius HaTorah, which tell us physically what to do and so forth. And there's Pnimius HaTorah, which is represented by the levels of Nekudim, Nekudis, Tagim, Nekudis, and Taimim, which are various layers of the secrets of the Torah. Paroi means to reveal, to expose. And Paroi, in general, as far as this Maamar is concerned, means to expose the side, the Pnimius HaTorah. So you have the Chitzonius, which is the Oisius HaTorah, and you have the Pnimius, which is Paroi, who's revealing Pnimius HaTorah, but there's various levels of Pnimius HaTorah. And the highest level is Taimei Torah. So the Alter Rebbe says, if Paroi is revealing Taimei Torah, you don't have the Vayehi Miketz. Because what's the end of the story of the Vayehi Miketz? That you have Sheva Parshas HaTevis, which goes on Midas Tevis. And then after the Sheva Parshas HaTevis, you have Sheva Parshas HaRois, which goes on Midas Rois. That even when you're starting on a very high level, if the level of Gilu of Pnimius, of Tainug, of Taimei Torah, which you're revealing, is not the highest Madregas, it could be Nishtalshal, it could come down all the way until you can have Midas Rois. So because it's Parei Cholim, and he translated the word Cholim like the Nekudas HaCholim, which is the third Madrega of Torah. The lowest is Asius, the second is Tagim, that means the crown, the third is the Nekudas, and the highest is Taimim, which means the melodies, the musical notes. If Parei was Magala the Taimei Torah, there would have been Sheva Parshas HaTevis, and never would have been Sheva Parshas HaRois. But because of Parei Cholim, the Gili of Pnimius HaTorah was a very high level. But it wasn't the highest level, therefore Nishtal Shalom Mehem, the idea of Parshas HaTevis, which could bring to Parshas HaRois. This is briefly what we learned last week. There was also a shtickle diak on the words Vayehi Miketz Nasayim Yomim, and he connected it to Yom Yom, which we're going to be learning about tonight as well. But in short and in summation, what we learned last week was that even if one successfully reveals Pnimius HaTorah in Nigel Torah, in a way of Gilui, if it's not the highest Gilui, there could be what we call in our culture Yonikas HaChitzein. Parei Cholim brings the Sheva Parshas HaRois. If there had been Parei Tayim, however you would word it, in Megala Taimei Torah, then there would only be Sheva Parshas HaTevis, there couldn't be Sheva Parshas HaRois. So the Rebbe says, "Will be your Inyan," who I'm beginning on line 50. In order to explain this, says the Rabbi preface, as the Pasuk says, Mireis hayu lichukecha beveis megurei. The David HaMelech says, Mireis, the words Mireis has two translations. The first translation of the words Mireis is from the word song. And the second translation of the Mireis is Miloshan Lazamer Adita, which means to cut off the wicked, the enemies. So David HaMelech says, Chukecha, which goes on the Limud HaTorah, was for me Mireis. Mireis means it gave me pleasure, and Mireis, it defeated my enemies, Beveis Megurim, when I found myself in a home where I was a stranger when he had run away from Eretz Yisrael because Shaul was pursuing him. So David HaMelech said how when he was farshikt, when he was in Golos, Beveis Megurim, what kept him and held him and inspired him and sustained him was Chukecha, was Halachas HaTorah, because they provided him Zmidas, they provided him pleasure, and they provided him a koyach to defeat his enemies. And of course, on this, the Gemara says that David HaMelech was Danish. And as I told you in the last class, which was last week, that this pasuk and this Gemara is explained in Kuntres Achen, Igeres HaKedesh Kuntres Achen, that begins with the pasuk David Zmidas Koresl, Zmidas Hoylur Chachavis Megure. Zmidas David Koresl, who in Alter Rebbe's beer in Tanya is quite similar to the beer we have here in our Maamar. How is Torah called Zmidas altogether? Both in the sense of giving pleasure as well as in the sense of cutting off enemies. Why is David HaMelech punished? Why is it a crime to say I learned Torah and it nourished my soul? Why is it a crime to say I learned Torah and it protected me from enemies? And we're going to get back to this later. And later, for those who are concerned or interested, is line 118. Hine. So in order to answer this question, the Rebbe shifts to something else. Omru, the Gemara says in Gittin, Hashkim v'harev aleim lebeis hamedrash. When you have an enemy who's trying to destroy you and so on and so forth, one of the approaches to it is get up before them, go to sleep after them, and the early time that you're getting up and the late time that you're going to sleep, lebeis hamedrash, sit and learn Torah, ve'im kol me'eleim, they'll automatically be expired. They'll be destroyed. In other words, the idea of using Torah to defeat opponents. And this is a second inyan that the Rebbe brings. And again, the Rebbe is going to immediately change the subject. He's not going to go back to Hashkim Ba'arev until line 138, which is a distance from here. So we have one line, two lines, which we're going to revisit on line 118, and then the third line, line 52, which we're going to revisit on line 138. It says the Rebbe in order to explain these two questions. The question why Torah is called Zmidas and why David is punished, and the question of Hashkim v'Harev me'eleim, aleim lebeis hamedrash, ve'im kol me'eleim. And of course, if you think about it very plainly, you see the relationship between the two. Because as I explained to you, the word Zmidas doesn't only mean music. The word Zmidas also means lezamer aritzim, which is the same idea as Hashkim v'Harev lebeis hamedrash, ve'im kol me'eleim. So we have two things hanging on a shelf that we need to revisit in order to explain. What is a Taj Zmidas? What's the Taj Shem Kol Me'aleim? And why Nenash? Says the Rebbe, the Hinik Siv. I want to preface a pasuk. And the pasuk says, Rabbi Asisa, you did much. Ata Havaya Lekai, you have become my personal God. Niflei Secho Machshavei Secha, whose wonders and whose thoughts, Eleinu, were given to us in a way that it reaches us. Ein Arei Lech. All of this is incomparable to you yourself. I will relate and I will speak. It's more than I can possibly ever tell. It's a pasuk. It's a pasuk in Tehillim. Now, first I want to tell you a word. We happen to be recording this class, Gimel Tevis. I don't know when the class is going to be played, but the class we record Gimel Tevis, which happens to be the yard site of Rabbi Yossi Mental Tanabam Shalom. So I'm going to mention it be a schus for him and a schus for us. I think I heard the story from him directly, but I certainly heard the story from his children. This is Tam Avort, Chassidishe Avort from Rebbe, that by the Friedrich Rebbe, he would say Maimorim. There was a whole seder how he said the Maimorim and how the Bachrim were able to come to the Maimorim and so on. And after the Rebbe said the Maimir, there was Chazara. The Bachrim, the young light, would Chazar the Maimir. They would review the Maimir. And then, as was the tradition by earlier Rabbeim, Shabbos in the morning or Sunday morning, depending on what time of year it was, the Chayzrim, those young alike who were exceptional in being Teifes HaMaimeh, would go into the Rebbe and they would give the Maimeh back to the Rebbe. So he said once a Maimeh, and I think it's known which Maimeh it is, but I don't know. And he quoted this pasuk, which is quoted quite frequently in Chassidus, but he misquoted it. Rabbi Sasisa Torah D'Shem Elekoi. And instead of saying Agida v'adabeira otzmo misaper, he said Agida v'asapeira otzmo misaper. So when the Bachrim were reviewing the Maimeh with their Mashpia, who was also the Rebbe's Maskir, Reb Chatzke Fegen, the Bachrim said to Reb Chatzke, what should we say? The pasuk says Agida v'adabeira, and the Rebbe said Agida v'asapeira. So he told them, and maybe it was based on some kind of rules that he had from the Rebbe, that they should say the pasuk as it's written in Tehillim. Agida v'adabeira, not as the Rebbe said it. And me'inyan le'inyan derech agav, shebederech agav, the previous Rebbe related that when he was learning his Bar Mitzvah Maimer, and he came to the pasuk where it says Mi ka'amcha Yisrael goy echad ba'aretz, it was very difficult because the pasuk says Mi ka'amcha Yisrael, and the Maimer says Mi ka'amcha ki Yisrael goy echad ba'aretz. So the Friedrich Rebbe said I had a very hard time saying a pasuk different than it's written. Mi ka'amcha Yisrael goy echad ba'aretz as opposed to Mi ka'amcha ki Yisrael goy echad ba'aretz. So he told his father, the Rebbe Rashab, that it's difficult for him to say a pasuk, not the way the pasuk's written. So the Rebbe Rashab said to him, "Du soll sagen wie steht." You say the way it says in the Maimer. Anyway, so they hachazed it this way. Instead of saying, as the Rebbe had said, "Agida v'asapeira," otzmu misaper, they said "Agida v'adabeira." So they went into the Rebbe to Chazara, and one of the Bachrim, probably Rabbi Mentlik Alav Shalom, Chazar, the Maimir to the Rebbe would make corrections, and then they would ask questions. It was a whole Seder of Chazara. And he said, Agid v'adabeira atzmo misaper. So the Frierdiker Rebbe says to the Bacher who's Chazaring, I didn't say that. I said something else. He said, Agid v'asapeira. So of course it was not comfortable for a Bacher to speak back to the Rebbe. So the Mashpia, who was the Maskir, Reb Chacha, spoke up in his defense and said, I told him that he should say that it's written in the Pasuk, Agida v'adabeira, rather than Agida v'asapeira. So the Frierdiker Rebbe responded, Azoi? With a tmiyah. Really? As if someone had just told him something that he never heard in his life. In other words, I know that I misquoted the Pasuk. And then he says, Se'a Gan Eden Teira. This Teira is from Gan Eden. This is the way I said, as is given in Gan Eden. Pshat wird sagen at Zweiter, but this is the story. Now the second thing I want to say is that the way we are going to learn this pasuk in this Maimir, the sequence should be Rabbi Sassi Sata Hashem Elakai Defesecha B'Shvach Aleinu Agide V'Adaber Atzmo Misaper, and then the word Ein Arech Elach. In other words, Ein Arech Elach is separate from the whole rest of the pasuk. Rabbi Sasisa, Ata Vayelekai, Niflesecha Mashvach Aleinu, Agide V'Adaber Atzmo Misaper are making one point, and Ein Arech Elach is making a different point. Now the way the Maimir proceeds is it analyzes it ala Seder, explains the pasuk in order. First Ein Arech Elach, and then Agide V'Adaber Atzmo Misaper. But in terms of the interpretation, Ein Arech Elach is separate from the whole rest of the pasuk, which makes this particular read a little bit difficult to understand, a little bit hard to understand. But I'm saying this at the outset, so when I go through it, you'll have clarity. In this pasuk, all the words, besides for the word Ein Arech Elach, are making one point, and the word Ein Arech Elach are making a different point. And I'm going to tell you up front what the point is. The point is that the Alter Rebbe is going to discuss with us the godly investment in creation. Not only the godly investment in creation that there should be a creation, but the godly investment in creation that creation should appreciate him. And then the Maimon is going to tell us Ein Arech Elach, the godly investment in creation, plus the godly revelations that enrich the creation and give it a sense of him in a rich and a meaningful way, is all nothing compared to Atzmos Amhos. Ein Arech Elecha. It's nothing compared to Atzmos. And that's the point of this pasuk, as our Maimon is going to be developing it over the next handful of lines, that there is great revelations of the Eibishter, which could be called the secrets of Torah, the taimim, the gishmak of Torah. All of it is Ein Arech Elecha. When you're comparing it to Atzmos Amhos, to Hashem himself, it's all inconsequential. And that's what we're going to be discussing from line 53 until line 80, I guess. So let's go. Obi Yerakos Rabbi Sasisa is explaining this pasuk, and we're going to begin with the first two words in this pasuk. Rabbi Sasisa, he's going to go through every single word of the pasuk. It says the Rebbe Pirish Rabbis, and line 56 says the word Pirish Rabbis, and line 57 begins with the word Asisa. Pirish Rabbis, the meaning of the word the Rabbis, much or many. Kol dava shurav yatzim, anything which is great and very powerful or intense is called Rabbis. Rabbis means great creations. Hainu, this is an allusion to Elam Esayenim, Agadelas and Reis, the supernal worlds, the higher worlds that are great and awesome. And Beklal in Chassidishe Kabbalah, Elyon goes on Atils. So Rabbis means the world of Elokus. Asisa is the other extreme. Bechines Asiya Gashmi is the physical world. Shenishtal Shalomei Lolo B'Madreges Rabbis V'Shenus, that it descends through the chain reaction of levels, from cause to effect, through many steps, different and various different types of steps. So Rabbis means there's the highest worlds. Asisa means there's this lowest worlds, and there is many steps between the higher world and the lower worlds. So the pasuk as it concludes, Agida v'adabeira atzmo misaper, the number of levels and stages that one needs to traverse, needs to go through, to go from the madrega of Rabbis, which is Elam Yisrael Yenim. So madrega of Asiya, which means Asiya Hagashmis, it's atzmo misaper, it's infinite, it's beyond count. Achinas havu b'chinas Asiya Gashmis, until the physical Asiya was created. So Rabbis and Asisa are a contrast. And they represent the entire scheme of Seder Ishtalshos from the highest worlds, which are called Elam Yisrael Yenim, onto the lowest world, which is our physical world. Now the next three lines I'm reading as a bracket. Line 59. Ukumei Shekasov. In contrast to what says in the pasuk, Lama Yemru, why should the Goyim say Ayeh Elokeim? Where's your God? Goyim say Ayeh Elokeim. What is the meaning of Goyim saying Ayeh Elokeim? That the Goyim say that the Eibishter is in heaven, it is not on earth. Shu Bechinas Ayeh, the Eibishter is unknown. In other words, Shu Muvdul Umechusa Verachi. The Eibishter is separated and concealed and distant, Mehem from the lower worlds, as the pasuk brings the quote of Goyim, Rama Kol Goyim B'Gem. V'layadu v'layavinu. But the guy doesn't understand. And what the guy doesn't know is even the lowest world, which is the world of Asiya, is linked to the Eibishter's Chayfetz. Shenishtal shel Chayfetz Havaya, that the will of HaKadosh Baruch Hu, which is Ein Seif and Seif Klam in the sense Kol Kach, Achahu Bebechinas Asiya, Gashmi is in the physical Asiya. So the guy says the Eibishter is in heaven, not on earth, and therefore he argues Ayeh Elokeim, whereas the Eibishter who is in Zergot. And the teretz is not Velikeinu Bashamayeh, but Kol Shachafetz Asa. That since the creation comes from Ratzon, his Ratzon is in Asiya. In other words, what is the Alter Rebbe adding in these three lines, 59, 60, and 61? That there's a link between Rabbis and Asisa. Rabbis are the worlds of Ein Sof. Asiya is Asiya, Gashmis. And you should know, Rabbis Asisa. The same Eibishter that makes Rabbis makes Asisa, because it all comes from Chayfetz V'Ratzon Havaya. So Rabbi's Asisa is a statement, it's two words that represents all of Seder Ishtalshlos, from the highest levels to the lowest levels. V'kol kach lama, why did the Eibishter make all of these worlds till the world of Asiya? Kadesh yi havaya lekoi, the next three words, ato havaya lekoi, that the Eibishter should become our personal God. As if we've had many opportunities to discuss, and of course it's based on Tanya Perek Mavav and Tanya Perek Mem Zayin. There's an incredible difference between the word Elokim and the word Elokai, or Elokeinu. Elokim means the godliness of concealment. Elokai or Elokeinu means our personal God. The Eibishter is Kechenu v'Chayeseinu. So the Eibishter makes so many worlds, from the worlds of Elmas Halyenis until Elmas Asiyah, and all of them are inspired with the Chayfetz Havaya, which is one of the same thing. Why Havaya Elokai? The Eibishter should be unzer Got, our personal Elokus. Al Yedei, how does godliness become personalized to us? And the answer is the next three words, Niflei Secho, Machshavei Secho Elei. The Eibishter makes the whole Seder Ishtalshlos, from the highest levels to the lowest levels, called Rabbi Asisa. And he makes it for Atav Ayelekoi. He wants the Eibishter to become our personal God. And how is the fact that it's our personal God revealed to us in the three words, Niflei Secho, Machshavei Secho Elei, which, as you'll see momentarily, goes on the Teda. Taiches the Rebbe Adeiki Niflei Secha, your wonders, Machshavei Secha, and your thoughts, which is going to later be translated as Kesed and Chochma, later was given to us. Geraisa mechochma nafkis, even though Teda comes from Chochma. Pirosh, it only means that Ikir is Galuso b'Chochma. It means it's revealed in Chochma. Avol b'emes, to be sure, Teda is not Chochma, Teda is higher than Chochma. In other words, who Uretzeini Shal Malkam, it's the will of HaKadosh Baruch Hu, and we know over who Uretzeini Echad, the word who, Hey, Vav, Aleph, is an abbreviation for who Uretzeini Echad, he and his will of one, and the highest Madrigas, like it says in Samach Vav. And the will of HaKadosh Baruch Hu means the will of Natzmas and Hus, Pnimi Esaratz. And Teira comes from Pnimi Esaratz, and it only manifests through Choch. And this is how Hashem delivers, in a way of experience, in a way of Gili to us, the concept of Hashem Elokai, our personal God, through Niflei Secho, Machshavei Secha, Eleinu, by giving us the Ratzon Ha'elyena, the Chochma Ha'elyena, that it reaches us. And he translates, V'zeo Niflei Secha, that he reveals to us the At Havaya Elokai, which justifies why Rabbi Asisa, by revealing godliness to us through the Torah. First of all, Niflei Secha, Shu Masha Muflo, Muvdlo Mechusa, what's wondrous, separate, and concealed, which nobody can apprehend intellectually, which is Pele, the supernal wonder, which is Kesed and Pnimius, I guess. Umachshavei Secha, Bechinas Chochmei La, as opposed to Machshav, which goes in the Eibishter's Chochma, and both of them, the Pele of Kesed, and the machshava of Chochma, Nimshech Eleinu Idea Teda, is drawn to us through the Teda. So we have so far three parts of the Pasuk translated. Rabbi Asisa made so many worlds. Atav Ayalakai, the Ebi should be personalized to us. Niflei Secha, Machshavei Secha Eleinu, through the Teda, it's revealed to us. And again, the last four words, Agida, Vadabeira, Atzom Misaper, belong together with this half of the Pasuk. He's explaining the incredible variety or virtual infinity that's involved in creation, agida v'adabeira otzmu misapet, beyond the count, that brings the godliness from a higher level to a lower level. What about the three words Ein Yarech Elecha? Ein Yarech Elecha means Hashem Himself. And Hashem Himself has no levels. Or to use classic language, this whole pasuk, Rabbi Sasisa, Ata Vayelekai, Defesecha Mashvesecha Elenu, and the last words, Agida V'adabeira Otzma Misaper, are all Giluyim. Had Eibush reveals godliness and the pnimius of Elokus v'chuli, but it's all Giluyim. Ein Yarech Elecha is Atzmas. Ein Yarech Elecha, Agida V'adabeira Otzma Misaper, and now he explains the three words, Ein Yarech Elecha. Key. Yes, whereas, since it's true, there's an enormous chain series of steps in the chain reaction, and such a great descent from a higher level to a lower level. From an incredibly high level. Until a very low level. But you have to go through so many worlds, just beyond the count. Of all different types. And he brings Lashna Gemara K'mashikaz, what the pasuk says. In one pasuk it says, Hayesh, Mispar L'Gedud of, is there then a number to the Eibishter's legions or battalions or companies? Meaning to say that there's a finite number of malach. And in another pasuk it says, Elef Alofim Yisham Shunei. I'm sorry, Hayesh, Mispar L'Gedud means there is no limit. It's infinite. It's a bitmia. Is there a limit to his Gedudim? Another part says, Elef Alaf Misham Shunei V'Ribi Revayin Kadam Yevakum. Elef Alaf means 1,000,000. Ribi means 100,000,000. That the number of malachim serving him is finite. And the Gemara asks the question: is it infinite or is it finite? And the Gemara answers, Elef Alafim V'Ribi Revavin is Misper Gedud Echad. V'Legedud Avein Misper. Each Gedud is finite, but there's an infinite number of finite Gedudim of malachim. V'Hu Misper Gedud V'Heichel Echad. It's the number of within one legion and one chamber, but the number of different malachim groupings, the Torah is infinite. So there's incredible stuff going on in the Elam HaSalyenis, which are the precursors which set the stage for bringing a lakus from a higher level to a lower level to create a siyah. Nevertheless, when you account for all of the worlds, from the highest, which is Elam HaSein, to the lowest, which is Elam HaSiyah, that the entire ishtalshus is for the purpose of Ata Hashem Elokayni V'Lisecha Mashvesecha Elenu Agida V'Adabeira Otzma Misaper. So the Eibishter creates all of these worlds to bring godliness from the highest of high to the lowest of the low, but that's only Giluyim. Afal Pekei, nevertheless, kulam all of the above. And Yarech Elecha, when you're talking about the Eibishter himself, they're incomparable. In other words, Shafi Lu Bechinas Hagaveh Yamei, the very highest of levels. Shushei Rishas highest Havat, which is the root for the beginning of the process of creation. When you compare it to the Eibishter himself, Ein le erech klal, it has no worth whatsoever. Nothing is in its category. Nothing is its level of substance, klal whatsoever. Because that whatever level you happen to be discussing, from the highest levels to the lowest levels, is bechinas nivrei netzach, the creator and emanation. And therefore, v'yeshle hascholas, it has a beginning, and has a gvul, has a limit. Mash'ein came bebeidi is Baruch line 76, as opposed to the Eibishter himself. The kula, that all of the worlds, from the highest levels to the lowest levels, kamei, in his presence, is klam mamish choshev, is mamish nothing. Ve'etzlei nechshav akel ka'ayin. To him it's all nothing. In other words, at bechinas harisheina, the highest level, which was called before rabbis, or bechinas achein, the lowest level, which was called before asisa. Sheb madrega techtein, on the lowest step, hakel shove etz, it's exactly the same to atzmas amus. So this entire pasuk, rabbis asisa, and the last four words, Agida V'Adabeira Otzma Misaper, talking about Giluyim, revealing very high levels of godliness. But that's what it is, levels. And the Eibishter himself is Ein Yarech Elecha. Nevertheless, even though the Eibishter himself is Ein Yarech, nevertheless, the Eibishter provides for Giluyim. In other words, he provides for the creation and provides for the revelation of godliness in the lower worlds through these many levels. Liasi Shtalshlos, so there should be a chain reaction of worlds, even though Lagabi Atzmos it's all the same. V'ri the Samadregas, and descend from step to step, and in order to facilitate this Giluyim, Hutzrechlias Madregas Otzmo Misaper, there's a requirement to have a number of steps which has beyond the measure, beyond the number. That the world should not become bottled from therefore. So the Rebbe is saying two things. The first thing the Rebbe is saying is that the Eibishter didn't only create a world. He wants him to be revealed in the world. And for this purpose, he made a whole Seder Ishtalshlos and many levels of godliness, until godliness can be revealed in the lowest world without destroying it. And then there's the Eibishter himself that is Ein Arechei Lech. That's the pshat in this pasuk, as we're understanding it in this Maamar. V'chol zehu b'shvil. Why does the Eibishter create the Agida v'adabeira atzmo misaper Shia Vaya Lekai? The Eibishter become my personal God. V'nifleisecho machshavasecha eleinu. That should reveal to us the madrega of Keser, which is called Pella. And the madrega of Chochmah, which is called Machshava. Like it says in Zayah, Machshava Vayehi. Machshava goes on Chochmah. Kanal, as we discussed before. So you have all of these revelations to bring the Eibishter to the lowest world, but you must remember the idea of Ein Arechei Lech. Now put that on a shelf. Okay, put that on a shelf. The Rebbe raised 3 questions. The first one was about Zmidas Hailu Chukecha. The second was about Hashkim B'Hara B'Beis HaMedesh. And the third was Rabbi Sasisa. And explained the third. But he's not ready yet to go back to the first and the second. He goes off on other subjects. V'hine, line 81. He's changing the subject to some extent, but ultimately he's going to be making the same point. The same point is that there's all of these levels, from the lowest levels to the highest levels, that reveal godliness. But to Atzmos, it's nothing. Included in all of these levels is the Torah. And not only the Torah, but the halachas HaTorah. And not only the halachas HaTorah, but the gishmak, the oinig, the ein seif, which is behind the halachas HaTorah. V'hine. I'm sorry. Kedem matan Torah hoyu, before the Eibishter gave us the Torah, the situation and the whole of creation, both in El Yedim and the higher worlds, as well as v'tachtenim in the lower worlds, nizein b'chasdish al HaKadosh Baruch Hu, they were sustained by HaKadosh Baruch Hu's kindness. Hainu, this means, like it says in Medrash, Chavav Deidas, Hanei Chavav Kili Elam Chasdei Chavav Deidas, Shenizein b'chasdish al HaKadosh Baruch Hu, from the Madrega Verach HaPayim, from Keser. Hainu Shahoya Mozen Elam Esayein v'tachtenim, the food for the highest worlds and the lowest worlds. V'chayesam, and their life, Nim Shach Memekeidam v'deishisam, coming from their source and from their head. Malmai Lalamata, from the highest levels all the way to the lowest levels, Benedava, with the Eibishter's benevolence. Chesed Pashut doesn't only mean unconditional kindness. It means plain kindness without any measure whatsoever. Besarusa Deliyei Levad, it was entirely unilaterally provided by Atzmos and Huf. The Eibishter gave it to us. Once the Torah was given, now you have Torah and mitzvahs, and schar, you have to earn it. Hine. Ki yum chayes ha'elam, is the existence and life, the guf and the neshama of ha'elam, of all of the worlds, from the highest ones to the lowest ones. Now listen carefully. Hu hayedei ma'isa tachtenim, it's through the physical actions that we do. B'teira u mitzvahs mimata l'mayla, in our learning Torah and our doing mitzvahs, from the lower levels to the highest levels. So in the previous pasuk, Rabbi Sasisa, To'ah Vaya Lekai nifleisecha mash v'secha eleinu ein arechei lecha agida v'adbeir atzmo misaper. It describes revealing godliness, but didn't make mention of the fact that the revelations of godliness have to do with Torah mitzvahs. Here he does. But he has a kvetch, that it's the physical Torah mitzvahs. The physical Torah mitzvahs that we do down here is the source of the giluyim of the nifleisecha machshvasecha eleinu, to the havaya lekoi, to atzmu misaper, the godliness in the highest worlds to the lowest worlds. And he explains it. For example, Eretz, the physical earth. Halazu Hagashmi is this physical earth, which is called Daimim. But Shematzmach has called Minimatainogum, all pleasures come from the earth. The earth is the source of all plants, which feed all animals, which feed everything. And these Gidulim in Haaretz, whether it's Tzemeach or it's Chai and so forth, is Mozain Ha'adam, the sustenance of a person, V'kiyim V'chayusei, and the existence of his life. And even when a human being is eating animals, the animals of course ate plants, and the plants live from the earth. Says the Rebbe, therefore, the primary growth in life of the animals and plants is in the end it's all about the earth. Right? This is what you have been again to the way you determine whether you have to give, let's say, meiser or peya or truma and so on and so forth, has to be gedulim in haaretz, and gedulim in haaretz could be also gedulim. An animal eats grass, which eats from the earth, and therefore it's included. Nimtza thus shakol mazon v'chayes ha'adam, the sustenance and life of a person, huaydei birur, it's by transforming, clarifying, and transforming. Shenivchar atei, that the choices is uplifted, And it all begins, it starts in the lowest levels. It says the Rebbe in the Nim Shulkach Adarach Moshel, the same is the way of analogy. Hinimoz and Elam Esalyen, the sustenance of the higher worlds. They get their life min ha-Torah, from the Torah and the mitzvahs, and the Alter Rebbe finishes on line 91, which is this lowest world. There's something about this lowest world of the way we perform mitzvahs. But there's also something about the lowest world, the way we study Torah, which is different than the way mitzvahs and Torah exist in the higher worlds, and therefore what we're doing down here is the basis for everything that's happening Lamaila. So what is the difference between mitzvahs and Torah down here and mitzvahs and Torah Lamaila? So of course the simplest answer is by Meisim Chafshi. Lamaila there's no mitzvahs at all. But there's something else. Not only are there no mitzvahs Lamaila, there's no halachas Lamaila. Lamaila you have Torah Chochma, and you can learn it like this and you can learn it like this. The idea of saying who's right and who's wrong, what should I do, B'Poyel like Beis Hillel, like Beis Shammai, does not exist in El Misal Yed. So down here you have the advantage of mitzvahs maisis, which reaches atzmos, and you also have the advantage of halachas ha-Torah, which, as you'll see soon, also reaches atzmos. And this is the pshat in the pasuk salslo terem mekam. And again, the Alter Rebbe could just as well have continued the Maamar and talked about kiyum mitzvahs, doing mitzvahs that only physically do mitzvahs, but he chooses not to do that. Instead, he chooses to talk about Torah and to separate Torah b'chlal, where you say Elu ve'elu divrei Elokim Chaim, from halachas ha-Torah, which are fixed in one way. And he explained it based on the pasuk Salslo today. Of course, this pasuk Habarich is Tafresh Samach Vav with a long hezbit about why halachas reach atzmos, because you have to discern, you have to separate hairs. Like a person who separates his hair. Each one should be on its own. And there's a gishmak ma'aseleh, which I'm going to insert right here as a dugma l'davar, that when the Rebbe Rashab was a little boy, his grandfather, the Rebbe Tzemach Tzedek, put him on his lap. And he took the Rebbe Rashab's little finger, and he brushed it through his beard like this here. And then he said to the little boy who was sitting on his lap, rhetorically, of course, Tzebersht, dachtzach tzebersht. So did you brush my beard? Did you separate all the hair? Did you disentangle all the entanglements? And of course, it was a symbolic act, if you will. And then he said, Nadir ayad in Kabbalah. Here, I'm giving you a hand in Kabbalah. When the Rebbe Rashab was a Rebbe, it says in Teireh Sholem, quote, Ichab ayad in Kabbalah. The Rebbe Rashab said, I have a yad in Kabbalah. He got it from his Zayd. And how did he give it to him? By separation. The exercise of learning and analyzing is not comparing. I always tell my students, it's one of my quotable quotes, correlation is always simplification. Learning and comparing things to each other is making them less. The whole inyan of limud is to discern, is to show differences between one thing and another. That's salsala, when you separate the halachas, and this is halacha in this case like this, and this is halacha in this case like this, and this is halacha in this like this, with Terem Mecca you reveal the highest madrigas. Kachu, I'm on line 93. B'chol prati halachas. The same is true all the specific halachas, ein misper, which are of course limitless. That in this case the law should be like this. And in this case the law should be like this. All of them are nimshach michoch mi'lah, that come from the Eibishter's wisdom, and above choch mi'lah, that come from the Eibishter's ratzon, as represented by the two words niflei secha, which is kesed, and machshvei secha, which is chochma, niskel, as we discussed earlier. But only when you learn the physical halacha and you study it and you analyze it and you understand that you come to a correct psak din, do you have this inyan v'tarei Mecca. Just like the doing of the physical mitzvahs sustains all the elemis halyenim, the learning of Torah, but specifically halachas ha-Torah, sustains all the elemis halyenim. And I'm going to say this just for the purpose of clarity. In this Maamar we're going to discover that even doing mitzvahs and even learning Torah on a level of halacha l'maisa is still not atzmos, it's still giluyim. There's something higher than it, which is called in the previous pasuk ein yarech elach. Zog der Rebbe weiter v'zehu, and this idea that all of the worlds live on the physical mitzvahs that we do, and the understanding of the Torah on a physical level that we understand, and the sustenance of all of the worlds from the highest and the lowest to the lowest is these inspirations, are these Torah and mitzvahs. It explains what David HaMelech says, Ma godlo asach havai. Even the actions of the Eibush that are godlo. How much deeper must be Not the actions of HaKadosh Baruch Hu, but the thoughts of HaKadosh Baruch Hu. And I'm going to make it clear up front, just like Ma Godlu Masech Havaya is Giluyim and Atzmos, Me'edom Kamay Shchoisecha is also going to be interpreted by the Alter Rebbe as being Giluyim and Atzmos. And he breaks it down. So we have now another pasuk, right? But this is the fourth pasuk or the fifth pasuk. Ma Godlu Masech Havaya, you have to understand the greatness of Hashem in His Maisim. Me'edom Kamay Shchoisecha, even greater greatness of the Eibush as it is in His Machshavas. Pirish Godlu, what does it mean that the Eibishter is great in his actions? So he brings Lashna Gemara Yedu Al Derech Mashamar Razal B'Mokom Shata Meisei Gidlastish Al HaKadosh Baruch Hu Shom Mata Meitze An V'Sanusei. The Alter Rebbe brings it in Tanya that any time and place you could see Hashem's greatness, it's His humility that you're observing. So, if you could call Him great, it's not His true greatness. Which is why you have the pasuk that says, God la Hashem mehul ma'ed v'legdulasei ein chekir. You can't understand the HaKadosh Baruch Hu. And then you have God la Havayim mehul ma'ed kishahu be'ir alikenu, that you could understand His greatness. So God la Havayim mehul ma'ed, God la Masech Havayim means the greatness of the Eibishter which you can know from the world. And the greatness of the Eibishter you can know from the world has to do with the Eibishter's humility. Key. You cannot reference the Eibishter and call Him great. Any allusion to Him, which is personal, is an insult. You're talking about the Eibishter. Hashem's greatness is impossible to calculate, and to tabulate, and to measure, and to even appreciate. It's not in the worth, and in the measure, and in the place, klal, whatsoever. Sheepa love Lashon Gedula to use the word great. Ela Lashon Gedula who, when you describe the Eibush as being great, says the Alter Rebbe, it's an v'sanus, it's his humility. What does that mean? The Eibush lowering himself to invest himself in the world on a level of niflei secha b'achshavei secha elena, to reveal godliness in the world. So Lashon Gedula who, when do you call the Eibush great? When he's an v'sanusi, when he's humble. In other words, slabish b'bchinas amidas Gedula, that he's enclosed in this midah of Gedula, is pasha to slabish teich alman lachi esim, to come down into the world to give them life. So Godel Havaya Ma Godlu Masecha Havaya means Hashem lowers himself to be great in relationship with the world, because he himself by himself is above that altogether. You can't call him Godel at all. So Magodlu Masech Hashem is not describing the Eibishter per se. Magodlu Masech Hashem is describing the Eibishter in his godless in relationship with the world. What's the pshat in these words? Magodlu Masech Havaya, that the Eibishter lowers himself and humbles himself to be great in relationship to the world. This is halachas. Kimashanim Shech ben Ispashat Lamato was drawn and it radiates below Derech Prati Halach Achas, the specifics of one halacha. Hu Mazin Vikiyum V'chayis, the energy, the life, and the light, which is in a single halacha, is the sustenance and the existence and the life of Kol Ha'elam as Hayenim V'Tachtenim, the higher worlds and lower worlds. And that's the type, Salsla B'Treim Mekah. In Paskening Halacha, in understanding Halacha, Paskening Halacha, you're revealing the highest Madregas in Halakus. Just like Niflei Secha Machshvesecha Elenu. And as the consequence of the power of a halach, and the worth of halacha, and the significance of halacha, and the godness which is hidden in halacha, so Elim Esalyenim Heim Kla Mamish are entirely insignificant. Neged Mashanim Shach Prati Halacha Achas. There comes some one detail in halacha. Shimokar Chayis and Vakiyum, because it's the source of life in their existence. And that's Taka Pshat and Alter Rebbe Tanya and Kuntas Acher and David's Midas Kalas Lahu, that he focused on the Torah that has a relationship with the world, even if it's on the level which is higher than the world, but it has a relationship with the world. Kikol halacha, every halacha is hamshachas is pashat emirat snani baruch comes from the Eibishter's will, which is called in our Maimon Niflei Secha Pele v'chachmil on the Eibishter's chachmut, which is called in our Maimon machshava. Shehein Makera Chayis Kol Ha'elamis, which is the source of life for all the worlds. So Magodlu Masech Havaya means how great is the Eibishter in his tzimtzum to be godly in relationship with the world and provided with Niflei Secha Machshavei Secha. However, I'm on line 107 now. So far, we're describing his greatness in his actions vis-a-vis the world. But there's something even higher than that. And what's even higher than that, his thoughts. The Eibush is pnimius ateda, not the teda that comes down the level of Allah, but the gishmak of the seid and the time teda of pnimius ateda, shebechinis lamayla, which is far above the practical level of the mitzvahs and the practical interpretation of the halachas ateda. Lamayla bechinis almas above the world altogether, but makev sevalem, it's indirect and hidden from them because it's surrounding them. Any misab b'techem, it's not revealed. So even Magadlo Masech Havaya is also incredible. Hashem is mitzamtzem himself to be great in relationship with the world. Allah has kama v'kama eid omku machshavei secha. It's even higher level of godliness, which is also available in Limud HaTorah. Umizeh yizbein amaskal, which should motivate a person with any seichel. Liyes b'teira savaya chefte, to desire the teira of the Eibishter, and moreover liyesas v'olas bazeh, it should give him gladness and joy in learning teira. And in Tanya Perek Lamed Gimel, the Alter Rebbe describes the simcha that a yid should get when he thinks about the idea that when he brings the Eibishter into his mind, he's making a dira le'yisbarach b'tachtenim. Over there he speaks more about his bonanos, and here he speaks pashat about teira. Because of the pasuk is v'chol chafeitim lishul, none of the desires of any of the worlds have any value compared to teira. The highest world's things and wills. That everything the Eibush desire, he made both on heaven and on earth, but on heaven it's on a much higher madrega. The word heaven alludes to the higher worlds. And we say they're in compared to the lower worlds, that even the higher worlds, when compared to one Allah, which carries in it not only chokhmah but also ratzon. So all of the worlds live from one Allah. And even the highest worlds cannot be compared to halacha lemaisa. Shekula mim klam mamish, they're all nothing but erech halacha ask up to one halacha shehi bechilas niflasecha machshvesecha now, which is love. In other words, Sai the nigla the teira, and even the seidat teira, which is represented by the words me'ed omko machshvesecha, is incredibly great. And the worlds are insignificant to it. When she calls like it says in the Zayir, the halachas are like threads and hair, and of course threads and hair are very precise and to be separate and distinct, and they can get very easily entangled, and successful disentanglement reveals their secrets. Every thread is hoping for the concealed word, like it says in Eitz Chaim. So Teira is moedendik. Mitzvahs, maisis are incredible, and learning halacha of Teira than here in this world, which is going to reveal the godless of Hashem, the amkos of His machshava, the pella and the machshava of the Eibishter. In learning Teira, because the Teira sustains all the world, is an incredible thing. And I'm going to repeat again. Even though it's such an incredible thing, the Eibishter himself is higher. So no matter how great, so how many topics did we cover? Right? The first topic we covered was Rabbi Sasisa Ta, the Shem Elokaynu v'secha ma'ashavach elenu ein yarech elecha gidu v'beirasum. The second one was the idea that after Matan Teira we have to earn it, and the ikir is mitzvahs ma'asis, salsot re'memeka. The third was Magad l'masech havai me'edam kumach shveisach. Now we're going to go back to the first conversation, which started on line 50, which is the Inyan from Zmidas Ha'ilucha Kecha. David the Melech learns Teira, it provides him with pleasure, it cuts off his enemies, and he's punished for it. How do all those things work together? Zog the Rebbe on line 118 V'zeh, this is why David the Melech says Midas Ha'ilucha Kecha B'veis Megure, that the Teira and mitzvahs acted for him as Midas, which means it gave him pleasure from the gishmak of Teira, and particularly since it cut off the wicked enemies that he had. Shayasos v'sameach, by me rejoiced in mitzvahs Teira. It gave him music and pleasure. Ella shenenash, and then he's punished. If Teira is such a great thing, to use all the expressions we had so far, it's great because it's midas. It's great because it's Rabbi Sasisa, Tavaya Lekai, Nifesecha Mash V'secha Eleinu, Agida, V'dabeira, Asum Misap. It's incredible. So why is he punished? Al Shekram Zmidas. Teira is not for the sake of enjoying it, and Teira is not for the sake of cutting off your enemies. V'layal Shalom Adbi. That's not the learning itself, because the person learns Teira, he also has Atzmas. El Al Shashivech Bazu Amayl L'chud. It's because instead of focusing on the atzmas of Torah, which is halacha l'maaseh, he started focusing on the richness, on the giluyim, the milas. Shehu makar v'chayes kol ha'elam is the source of life for all of the worlds. And the idea that he was focusing on the Torah in as much as the source of all of the worlds is an insult to the Torah compared to what the Torah is by itself, Torah as it is b'fnei atzmi. So therefore, as great as these inyanim are, what inyanim? Rabbi says, Sisa, Ata vayelekai, nifleisecha, machshavesecha, eleinu, ein arech elecha. I'm sorry, Agida v'daber atzma b'saper, all giluim. Ein arech elecha is atzma. And even halachas, and even mitzvahs ma'asiyos, in this maimer are being described as revealing giluyim and not atzmas. Shebe'emes, because the truth of the matter is, like we learned in the pasuk, ein yarech elecha. And what are the words ein yarech elecha tell us that zmiras hayluchu kecha, including nifleisecha, machshavesecha, eleinu, is giluyim. Shebe'emes, because the truth of the Eibishter's Torah is that it's gaveya lamaila, it's far, far higher, mibechinas kiyum v'chayes kol ha'elam, is from the very idea of giving existence and life to all of the worlds. In other words, because the Eibishter invested an enormous amount of creation, but the Eibishter himself was above that investment altogether. And by David HaMelech focusing on the Eibishter's investment in the world, he warranted an einish, because he should have focused instead on the Torah of the Eibish, which is be'ein arech, above. Sheba Emes, because the truth is, who, that means Hashem, and accordingly the Torah on the level which is one with Hashem, is Gavoya Lamaila, is higher and higher still, Mibechinas Kiyum V'chayes Kol Elamas, from the very idea of giving existence and giving life to the worlds. Hashem himself, in the language of the earlier pasuk, is Ein Arech Elecha. And the language of this pasuk, it's Gavoya Lamaila, from giving existence and life to all of the worlds, and it brings a pasuk. And this pasuk was mentioned briefly in last week's class about Shashuim Yom Yom. That the Torah says, I will be by him a tool for my vocation. I'll be a shashua, means a toy, a plaything. Yom Yom, that comes down in two levels of giluyim. That this is the Torah Mikeitz Nosayim Yomim last week. And it says in Medrash, Amun Mufla, that this skill, this vocation is Mufla. In other words, Shubechinas Pella Ha'elyon. So the word Amun and the word Shashuim Yem Yem both represent the idea that Torah is Giluyim. Bechinas Nifleisecha Machshavesecha. And perhaps Nifleisecha is Amun and Machshavesecha is Shashuim Yem Yem, but I don't know. The underlying point is that he brings the pasuk that says there's many madregas in Torah. The madrega of Torah, which is Kesed, the madrega of Torah, which is Ishtalshalus. But there's something above all those madregas. The two levels of Yem Yem are neged beis bechina, Shem V'Secha Machshavesecha. Not like I said earlier. Yem Yem is Nifleisecha or Machshavesecha. However, higher than Nifleisecha or Machshavesecha, higher than Shuim Yem Yem, and even higher than Ehye Esle Omen, there is the idea of Ehye Eshe Shai Shuim. The idea that the Torah is the Eibishter's plaything, which is removed from Amun and removed from Shashuyim Yem Yem. It's the delight, it's the pleasure, it's the toy that the Eibishter has in himself, or from the Torah which is one with him, which is altogether above having any relationship with the world. For example, one who toys and delights in his wisdom. When he speaks ideas. Similarly, and to a far greater extent, with millions of separations. Hashem delights in his supernal wisdom, which can't come into the world whatsoever. So you have Torah, which is called Shashuim, totally removed from the world, which is, so to speak, in line with the idea of Ein Yarech Elecha. And then there is Torah, which comes down into the worlds on a level of Yem Yem, which is called Nifleisecha or Machshavesecha, and as well as the infant Amun. Ella, this explains why David HaMelech Olav Shalom, Ella is only. David HaMelech Olav Shalom Eitarach Lefisha. David HaMelech decided temporarily, so to speak, to step away from the Madrege of Torah, which is Shashuyim Lefonov, for the level of Torah, which has a relationship with the world, to be Zemiris. Beveis Megure, when he was in an alien place. Shayuseinu, that he was hated. And of course, what did David HaMelech think? The hate that there is to him is part of the creation. And if there's a hate that there is to him, which is part of the creation, that part of the creation, which is the basis of the hate for him, comes from the Torah. He has to find in the Torah the source of this hate to transform it, like it says in line 132, because ve'ein dinim nimtakin ela b'shosh. If you want to sweeten the judgment, you want to sweeten the hate that there was to David HaMelech in this world, you have to go to the way the world is included in the Torah. Dainu b'sheidish es havos ha'elam is the root of the creation of the worlds. Kishin is hava v'nimshach, as it's being created and drawn, me'ayin amuchlat, from absolute nothingness. Le'esanegu le'esmeyak b'chalkim. So first of all, to bring down the source of the gevuras that he's experiencing in this life, as they are in the Torah, to sweeten them, and le'esanig v'le'smeyak b'chalkei, to delight and rejoice in his portion, asher hu mamshech b'teiraseh, that he brings down in his Torah, l'kiyum v'chayis ha'elamis, to give existence and life to all the worlds. So we're going to split this into two. Number one, there's dinim nimtakim b'shoshim, which is the other taichin zemiris from the word lazaman aritz. And number two, there is miris hayil lichukecha, which is le'esanig v'le'smeyak b'chalkei. Both of these are David HaMelech using the Torah in a utilitarian way, in a way that serves a practical purpose. Continues the Rebbe on line 135, Shayadezeh, that by focusing on Torah on this level, even though it's an incredibly high thing, it's what's it called? The Rabbi Sasisa. Atavaya lekai, nifleisecho, machshveisecho, eleinu. And then it is what? Agida v'adabeira, atzmu misaper. It destroys all obstacles because the obstacles live from the Torah. And when you reveal the shadish of the obstacles as they exist in the Torah, they can't be obstacles anymore. They're nullified to it. When the light is drawn below, the enemies are filled with awe and fear. So you're using the Torah to defeat an enemy. But how are you using the Torah to defeat an enemy in this Maimed? Not to destroy him, but to reveal his source. So I guess if you wanted to draw a distinction, you would say that in Tanya, Zmiras Haylucha Kechas, from the word Lazamar Aritzim, as they say tonight in Beis. And I think it's also in my memory from the Rebbe Marash, I think in Vakacha. That Zmiras means to cut off the enemy. Over here, it's to sweeten the enemy by revealing the enemy's source. Be that as it may, it's not what the Torah is in essence. It's the Torah that serves the purpose, no matter how high its source is. Now the Rebbe goes back to the second issue that he raised. Remember, we started off by bringing, first of all, Zmiris Hayilu Chukech Maveis Magure. We just went back to that. The second thing was Hashkem Vaharav Aleim Beis Hamed. We're about to read that momentarily. The third idea, Rabbi Sasisa Tadash Amalekai Neflesecha Machshavsecha Elenu Inyarecha Lecha Agida Asmasapa. We did. The fourth idea was the idea that after Matan Torah it's earned through halachas atayra and the concept of self-slot in Mecca. The fifth idea we did was Magodl Masacha Adeshem Eid Omku Machshvesecha, a series of ideas that bring out the incredible kayach of Torah, and particularly the kayach of Torah as it is Lamata, but it's all Giluyim. And in the end there's something called Enerech Lecha, which is Atzmos Samhus. And the Rebbe continues and he says, V'zuhi, this is also the understanding of the Maamar Chazal, Ha'etz Hashiyatzu Chazal, the idea proposed before. Hashkim v'harav aleim, get up before them, go to sleep after them, and spend the time in the Beis HaMedrash to destroy Klippas. Hainu sheibchines aleim. By getting up before them, you're higher than the Klippa, or their source. Ma'ila v'gaveim, above them, then being involved in learning the Torah. And according to this, Maimed Alima that Torah is going to the shadish of the Seinim, and from there sweetening the Dinim. Like he said on line 132, Shigaveya Naila Me'ed, you're learning Torah on a high level. Shimakachayis, which is the source of life. V'lachain, and therefore, since you're going to the source of life of the enemy, and you're revealing the enemy source as it is in Torah, they become nullified by themselves. They're automatically pushed away. And it's not the pshat that they're being destroyed, but when you're revealing their source, they're sweetened. So that's called hashkim. Hashkim means go to a very high level and reveal the source of the Torah. And then there's v'harav aleim hainu b'chinas nafshi kafal akel, to be in a state of humility and bittul, like dust. Lead them to be silent, v'lispel, and to suffer kanal, as discussed earlier. earlier means, when he talked about the idea of halachas being connected to dvarim gashmim and oretz, line 86, ka'ofer va'oretz, like earth and like sand and the earth. Shemene yetir lechem is the lowest level, and it feeds all of Seder Shtalshlos. Because v'chol lashpais mimata lamayla achar matan Torah canal, everything that flows after the Torah was given has to do with our avodah. When you separate the good from the evil, which is again a method of ozai memela yipalara. The evil falls. When one is bittul, they're in a position to create life and to clarify, to sustain the whole Seder Shtalshlos, v'yevudel and become bottle, like it says in the pasuk, yiyu ka'ayin v'yevdu anshe revecha, ke'in chayas they can't live. So hashkem aleim revealing their source in Torah. Harav aleim means being bittul and revealing the halachas, which is their source, lamata, which is again mevatel them. So hashkem v'harav aleim ve'kolam aleim is very consistent with the idea of Zmiris Ha'iluch HaKach Beis Magurei. But now that Rebbe concludes, Avo be'emes ein zu levada ma'il v'shavach HaTeira. But David was wrong, because that's not the highest mile of Teira. The highest mile of Teira is what the Pasuk calls Ein Arei Lecha, what we call in our culture Atzmos. Kim Kmeshakosva says in the Pasuk of Alayla Shirei Imei. Shirei Kri, how the Teira is the Abish, this song removed from the world completely. The plaything of the Eibishter, not on a level of Uman, not on a level of Shashuyim Yem Yem, but Shashuyim by itself. In other words, there's an union of Atzmos, where the Torah is above the world, and it's above the source of the world, and it's above giving life to the world. The Torah is by itself. And David is punished for focusing on a secondary aspect rather than focusing on a primary aspect. And this now ties into Farei Chelim, that even though Pareh is revealing Seidus HaTeira, which is the Gvaldik Azach, but since he's revealing Farei Chelim, Seidus HaTeira only at the level of Nekudas, which is connected to Miketz Nasayim Yama, which is called Shashuyim Yem Yem, which in our Maamar is Niflisecha, Machshvesecha, which is Kesen and Chochma. That's why there could be after the Sheva Podam HaTevis, Sheva Podam HaRois, and so forth and so on. And this explains how from the deepest levels of the Giloim Pnimiyas HaTeira there could be a unique Esachitzein. And only when you reveal the very highest level, which is called Taimei Teira, does that not occur. So tonight's class was a smorgasbord of Psukim and Moreh Chazal that were explained. And the constant in all of them is that the whole world lives from Teira. And when you reveal the world source in the Teira, you fix the world. And then this Teira which has nothing to do with the world. And when you focus on the Torah, which is the source of all the world, it's a wonderful thing, but it's only Parei Chelim. It's only Zmiris Ha'iluch HaKach Beis Magurei David Nenesh Aleim. Because there's the Ein Arei Lecha, the Eibush that is by himself. And the Torah is Shashuyim Ha'atzmi, which has nothing to do with the world, which is where the focus of a Yid should be.